Welcome, and thank you for coming to our session on the secret to driving growth by bringing your data together painlessly. My name is Sylvia Lacayo. I am with the product marketing team at 1010 Data. I bring to 1010 Data over 10 years of experience in the consumer packaged goods industry, with my most recent stint as a brand manager at Unilever. My co-presenter today is John Katzer, who is the Vice President of Customer Success and Sales Engineering at 1010 Data. And he also oversees the Product Development Group, so busy guy. Before we get started, I do want to point out that if you've seen baby imagery out there on the front of the program or along the staircase as you were coming up here, that's us. Those are our babies. We thought they were fun. But also the tagline is, that's unbelievably powerful. Because if you were to ever see a baby pulling a tractor, that would be pretty unbelievably powerful. It also just happens to be how we feel about our platform solution. And if you're interested in more details about how we could work with you, come to our booth 3943 or stick around after our talk, and John and I can answer any questions. Okay. So that's out of the way. Before we get started, I just want to give you a real quick run through of the agenda. So I will take us through just a few key retail trends that we are seeing in the market. And then I'll talk about the impact of bringing data together. And then I'll hand it over to John, and he will walk through why it's still actually quite challenging to bring data together for many retailers, and then how it can be painless. So with that, I'm going to start with a truism that everybody in this room already knows, but please bear with me for a minute. The retail industry has been disrupted in the past couple of decades. So it used to be that the relationship between consumers and brands or retailers was fairly linear. So a consumer would hear a radio commercial or see an ad on television. It would prompt him or her to go into a store, make a purchase. They'd go home. Maybe they would return it or exchange it. But everything was it was a fairly sequential order of events. And then the internet happened, and consumer connected devices became very prevalent, as we know. And that relationship then became less product-oriented and became more consumer-oriented, which meant that consumers were everywhere and always on, as you know, and retailers and brands were responding in kind or trying to respond in kind. But what we've seen in the past few years is that consumers have become much more savvy, and they have certain expectations about what it means to receive a personalized and targeted message. So the right message at the right time in the right place. And because technology is constantly evolving, consumer behavior is constantly evolving, which means that there are opportunities but also challenges, of course, for retailers. So this brings us to want to chat with you about some key trends that we're seeing in the retail space. Obviously, we don't have time to talk about every interesting trend. So we picked some trends here: fast fashion, mergers and acquisitions, this concept of total commerce, and then the relationship between online and in-store. Some of these are newer trends that are emerging, and some are, of course, mega trends that have been around for a little while. So with that, we'll dive into fast fashion. So fast fashion retailers like H&M, Zara, Forever 21 have had a pretty significant impact on the fashion retail industry in two primary ways. One, as we know, they've been able to compress the design, production, and supply chain cycles that allow them to bring the latest and greatest fashions to consumers much more frequently and much more quickly than their traditional retail fashion peers. The other thing that's happened is that they've been able to democratize fashion in a sense by making the latest and greatest fashions affordable for consumers. We think that they've been able to achieve this because they've essentially, for the last decade or so, been able to keep a pulse on what consumers are saying about what interests them, what's driving, the thing that makes them excited about fashion. and been able to integrate this information with their merchandising, promotion, and supply chain initiatives. The next trend we want to touch on is mergers and acquisitions. So M&As in retail and in manufacturing have traditionally been about either increasing market share or entering a new category. And that's still the case today to an extent. But what we have seen in the last, call it 18 or so months, is that a lot of traditional companies have been using M&As as a vehicle to accelerate innovation. So whether it's product innovation, technology, process, or business development oriented. So for example, Unilever recently bought Dollar Shave Club. And you could argue, yes, this is a way for Unilever to enter or accelerate their position in the hot men's grooming category. And by hot, I mean fast-growing category. But it's also a way for them to acquire the subscription model, which they did not have before. Dr. Pepper Snapple Group, recently acquired by Beverages for almost $2 billion. And you could argue, yes, it is definitely a way for them to accelerate their presence in the health and wellness beverages category. But it's also a way for them to simply acquire the manufacturing capability to make a tasty product that's also good for you or perceived to be good for you and is well received in the market. And then, of course, Walmart acquired Jet for $3.3 billion just a few months ago. And here, it's definitely about Walmart enhancing their e-commerce practice, taking it to the next level. But it's not like Walmart didn't already have an e-commerce practice that was fairly well developed, at least in comparison to their traditional retail peers. But in the acquisition, they're also able to now be familiar with the technology or the technological know-how to develop the algorithms that allow Jet to put the right promotion and the right product in front of consumers. Now let's switch gears a little bit and talk about this idea of total commerce. I don't have to explain to anyone in this room what that means, but just to level set, it's the expectation from consumers that no matter what channel they're shopping in, that experience should be frictionless and seamless. What I think is interesting from our point of view to talk about here is that, so remember when that relationship was product-based and linear, a consumer would walk into a store, make a purchase, and maybe he or she would bring that item back if they wanted a return or an exchange, or not. The retailer was going to capture pretty much everything that they needed to capture about that transaction and that consumer in that transaction in that single moment and in basically one platform. I'm oversimplifying a little bit, but I'm trying to make a point. Today, a consumer might start a search on Google on their home laptop for a product that they want to buy. And then they might continue that journey on their mobile device as they're walking to work or taking the train to work. And then when they get to their workplace, they might complete that transaction on their work laptop. And that item that they ordered might come to their workplace because it's easier for them. They might exchange it for a different color or different size at a store near their workplace and not necessarily near their home. And then they might go online and write a review for that product. And then they might send an email to customer service. So all of these micro moments of engagement with the retailer have to be pieced together to form that sort of single view of the transaction and of the consumer. So it's a lot more complex than it used to be before. But it's still important for a retailer or a manufacturer to capture that information because really that's the only way that they can feed into their merchandising promotion and inventory management strategies to be able to then serve the consumer again and again in an excellent way. And lastly, we want to touch on this idea of online and in-store working in tandem. So we know that retailers, probably some of you here, have been recently leveraging their physical store locations to act as sort of mini distribution centers or mini fulfillment centers to service their e-commerce sales. If you think about traditional retailers, and then you think about pure play e-commerce retailers like Amazon, Amazon doesn't have to do this because that is just the way that they do business. They are well known for having established fulfillment centers and distribution centers. But what is interesting then is it begs the question, why would a successful e-commerce retailer like Amazon decide to go into the brick and mortars channel with the launch of Amazon Go, which I think we've all heard by now is this store concept with just walkout technology. The consumer doesn't have to pay cash. They are simply already recognized by the store in some fashion or another, probably through like a Prime account or something like that. So why would Amazon decide to enter this space? And I think one of the reasons why is because there's still something very powerful about consumers walking into a store and interacting with a product, looking at it, feeling the weight of it, smelling it if it's produce, and then also interacting with a customer service representative in store, in person, in real life, but also maybe interacting with a brand ambassador in the aisle or something like that. So I think Amazon may be onto something, especially because data still tells us that 90% of retail transactions in the US are still happening in store or involve store in some way. The other point that we want to make here is that by having a connected store with just walkout technology, a retailer like Amazon is able to immediately capture data about a transaction or a consumer or shopper in store and rapidly apply any learnings from that data back into making that store experience an excellent one or a better one, right? But they can also apply those learnings to making their core online business better and essentially making that experience for the consumer better in that entire ecosystem of them shopping in the store, shopping online, and interacting with Amazon in more than just one channel. So that's kind of a win-win-win, not just for Amazon and retailers who venture into these kinds of technologies, but also win-win-win for a consumer who is interacting in various channels with retailers. So what do all of these trends have in common? This is the best way that I could think to articulate it, that essentially everything is more and faster. So more consumer touch points, more competitors, faster product development cycles, faster delivery, faster checkout, and so on and so forth. And ultimately, we think that winners are the ones who can adapt to faster and to more, but not by working more hours or working harder. I know about 5 people in this room, but I'm fairly certain that nobody here needs to work any more hours than they do in their day. Like, I certainly don't, John doesn't either. But what if it was about working more efficiently? What if it was about having the tools that let you get to the insights faster so that you can quickly test and learn and innovate and be one of those adapters? And this is where big data analytics plays a big role. So of course, we are all familiar with this, but to just set the stage, in 2011, McKinsey put out a study that said, well, it was across various industries, but we're just going to focus on the retail and in manufacturing industries, that by capturing the value of advanced analytics, retailers could see up to a 60% increase in net margin and a full percentage point increase in productivity. And then on the manufacturing side, up to a 50% reduction in product development costs and 25% reduction in operating costs, and a 30% gain in margin improvement. So fast forward about 6 years, it's 2017, and we could probably all in this room agree that some progress has been made in retail and manufacturing, but there's still a lot of opportunity to capture value from advanced analytics, right? So I want to leave you with one final thought before I hand it off to John. In order to capture that value from analytics on your business, you essentially need to do what we call data unification, which just simply means bringing together disparate data from whether it's internal data, external data, across silos, any data source, any type, bringing it all together on a single platform so that you can have a unified view of your business. And then, only then at that point, can you apply the analytics that are gonna let you generate the insights that you need to drive your business forward. We also recognize that it's still a challenge, and this is where John is now gonna take you through why it's still a challenge.
All right, thanks, Sylvia. So, as Sylvia noted, we are in an environment where there is more and faster for everything. The pace of change has dramatically increased. And this means that there are more strategic questions that we need to be answering at all times. Yet we spend a major amount of times in the advanced analytics space thinking about data structure, data governance, technology. Technology questions rather than focus on these strategic questions we're trying to answer. So why is that? It's because data unification is hard. These are hard technical challenges, right? So let's spend some time and think about why these challenges are hard first. First of all, we have siloed business users and applications, doing different things. We have point-to-point integrations that are intended to help us, merge source systems together for specific applications. We have a cumbersome process to answer strategic questions, and we have a real proliferation in the amount of data that we can use to answer these questions. So let's dig into each of these in turn. So first, let's think about how BI is delivered today. So predominantly, we have disparate business user groups who have different challenges. And a great best practice is actually to start with the end user. Let's think about what does merchandising need? Supply chain, finance, what are they trying to do? And what applications do they need in order to be successful? So we know every business user has a different view of what they want. There's different data, different metrics, maybe the same metric calculated different ways, different levels of aggregation, and guaranteed every different group has a different way they want to visualize the data. Maybe in Excel, often in Excel, maybe a PDF, maybe a BI tool. There's all these different ways they want to interact with it. So best practice is, hey, let's start with those end users. Let's think about what they want, and we'll build a solution for them. So the way this solution usually works is business users or someone who's responsible to be a liaison between business and IT will craft the spec for the application. Then we'll start with a source system, figure out how to manage the feeds, summarize them together, often into a cube or some type of data mart to support the application. And then on top of that, the end user can do the flexible analysis that they need. So this is some real advantages, right? So this is a best practice that's used across for a variety of reasons. The first one is that if the end user requests the right thing, this is going to be a great model because you've thought about them first and you've adapted through, and they get the data that they want in the final input that they want. But the challenge here, and any practitioner, especially on the IT side, might chuckle about this, is end users don't know all of what they want up front, right? There's new questions that they want to be able to ask. I knew I wanted to look at sales by week, except actually day of week matters now. I knew I cared about it by day, except time of day matters now. I knew I could aggregate it by time of day, except I actually want basket analytics, so I need line item. You have all these times in which we have an understanding of what we want. We'll build a solution for it that's cube-based or data mart-based, and that will work for that use case. But then you're in a lot of challenge when the use case changes. And then the last and one of the hardest challenges here is what happens when your use case straddles multiple different source systems or multiple different types of data. So the way we've handled that challenge as an industry is build what we refer to as point-to-point integrations, right? We say, okay, in order to build a forecasting application, I need to have sales data and inventory data, right? So that's pretty clear. But when we build a point-to-point integration, we kind of have a lot of the problems that we saw in the prior slide, right? We're still starting with what's the application we want to build or we want to execute on, And then we're building a point-to-point integration to solve that particular application needs. So in order to do that, we have to pick a level of granularity or a level of aggregation to build our data mart, our data cube on. In forecasting, this is a particular challenge where, if we think we're going to want to be forecasting weekly, but then we realize that under promotions, we're having an out-of-stock issue one of the days in, but we've already summarized weekly, we're gonna have a challenge in this model. If we think we care about this at the SKU level, but then our supplier partners wants to see it at the UPC level, we're gonna have a challenge if we think about how forecasting works. The other challenge of the point-to-point integrations is even when everything is working really well, from an IT perspective, this is a tremendous amount of management. We need to be thinking about every single system that we're connecting for every single application. So if we have a point of sale upgrade or a warehouse management system upgrade or some change, it's not just changing the feed in one place. It's thinking about how that affects our forecasting application, our marketing application. This is a lot of work. So those are some of the hardships in this point-to-point integration. But it makes sense why we approached it this way. This is a way to solve a problem that crosses different data sets. So the next challenge is, okay, so this is a solution if we know how data sets are going to integrate or if we know about these challenges in advance. But as Sylvia spent a lot of time talking about, what happens if there is an ad hoc question or a new strategic question our business wants to answer? So let's take a real example. Let's say an executive is thinking, what is the impact of a new direct-to-consumer player in our space? This is the type of question that a lot of retailers are facing, thinking through this type of problem right now. And we have an e-commerce offering. So how's that direct-to-consumer player affecting our online sales and our brick-and-mortar sales? So for a new strategic question like this, let's actually think about the steps a business user would need to go through in order to answer this question. So typically, the business analysts will have to create specs. They need to start thinking, okay, what data am I going to use to bring this together? And they'll have to write up specs that talk about what data, what level of aggregation, how it should work together. Email it to someone who's in charge of reading the specs and then prioritizing. Now, everyone who's been part of this knows that there's a back and forth because you try to write the specs well and then it's confusing and you have to, it takes a bunch of time. But eventually you get the specs right. Now you go into a queue and you're trying to prioritize against the myriad of things that enterprise IT is responsible for. Operational day-to-day support, making sure the business is running, making sure we are up to date in security, whole host of important enterprise challenges that makes it hard to divert time and attention for random ad hoc questions that some executive has us send in. But so it's prioritized. In this case, we're asking how does a direct-to-consumer affect us? So we're probably bringing in data from brick and mortar, our brick and mortar systems, our e-commerce systems, and then syndicated data, the traditional syndicated data sets, and also some of the newer players in online, maybe mobile transactions. And we're bringing all those together. So the IT analyst is going to bring all those data sets together in some type of data dump and send it off to the business analyst. In reality, probably in Access or Excel or maybe some other tools, but going to now try to play with that data, figure out their story, and then build a PowerPoint to present to the exec, something like that. So let's say they do all this, and the what we've found is that the direct consumer brand is having a big impact. They're affecting our revenue in both sides. So now we know, okay, so we've identified a problem. Now the exec will probably respond, well, I want to spend time now actually taking action. So I need the insight in which I can actually do something and change my business based on these results. So it doesn't really help me. I mean, it's good to know that they're affecting us, but now I want to ask the question, how are they affecting us? So can we do all this at a brand level? How is this affecting our private label versus items that our suppliers are working with us on? So actually, can you break this down by brand? Now the whole process starts over, right? Oh, my original spec didn't say break it down by brand. I need to go through the entire cycle again. And this, we refer to this as the analyst tale. When you work with business analysts, they'll chuckle along at the level level of effort this type of thing requires, and it makes it very hard to answer strategic questions. So the last key area of why this is challenging is related to all the others, but it's that we have this growth in what data is relevant and what data can help us answer strategic questions. And we know that market leaders are using new types of data to make better decisions. They're using store traffic data, they're using email receipt data, they're using all sorts of new syndicated panel data. They might be using consumer credit data. There's this proliferation of data that might be interesting. And also, there's more data that we have now. We are selling through our mobile channel, through our e-commerce. We have clickstream data on our site. We are collecting and generating data as retailers that we know matters, but it's hard to figure out maybe how it matters today. And so given some of the challenges we've listed in the prior three, it takes a lot of time to take each of these new data sets and figure out in what way do they matter and how can I use them across the business. So that creates another challenge. It's hard enough to do it on the data we know about, and then there's all these new data sets. So I think about this, we want to take a step back, think, okay, here are some challenges that are very important in our industry. So let's think about approaches that will maybe not solve everything, but make the challenges a lot easier to work with. And so 1010 has a specific approach that we think makes this data unification process a lot easier. So there are a few steps. The first is to identify and load the data. And by this, we mean all of the data. If you have a platform that makes it very easy to bring different types of data sets in, you can load data from all systems first and then figure out what matters. We'll talk about this more in a little. Next, you need to be able to analyze the data immediately after you've loaded it. So you can't go through that whole process every single time you're going to do an analysis, or things are going to just take too long. Once you've done that, then you need to be able to build some structure on the granular data that allows everyone in the company to benefit from those insights. So we need to build that structure and then scale it out. But that structure has to be inherently flexible, because we all know, something is going to change in the business. And then we're going to need to update the structure and be thoughtful about it in a way that will be very quick so end users can get benefit. So let's talk about each of these steps. So first, we have identify and load data. So very importantly, we think about loading first and transforming later. So we know that we are going to need to clean the data in a myriad of ways to make it, over time, to make it easy to understand. But that's a process. So we'll start, just load data as it is and work with it from there. Also, no pre-aggregation. This is incredibly important. If you've pre-aggregated or cubed your data at the source, when you're trying to analyze it, you lose the ability to ask those flexible questions, like look at it by day of week, look at it by hour, do market basket. If all our data is store by SKU by day, we've lost that ability to ask those types of questions. And the last piece is there's actually value in messy data. So if you can load data that you might not know about all the uses of it yet, instead of cleaning it on the way into a system, you might find lots of value in messy data. An example we've seen in another industry is cell towers will emit garbled signals when they need to be fixed. And if you clean all the data and get rid of the garbled rows of cell, you'll never find out, oh, this is something that needs to be fixed. So you want to be able to load data, as it is in a very granular way. And immediately after load, you need to empower people to analyze the data. And so there's two key components of this. So first, to gain immediate business value. So if we think back to how hard it was to ask that strategic question, that's because there's all this process that gets in the way of analysts being able to answer questions. And a big part of that is just, in order to ask hard questions, you often need to be a programmer, or you need to be able to understand all the source systems to be able to ask questions. But if you've loaded all the data and put it into one place, and you have front-end tools that are Excel-like and easy to use for business users, they can start and immediately start answering business questions. And also, if you haven't cubed the data and you haven't pre-aggregated the data, they don't need to go back and forth to figure out how to answer questions flexibly. They can just, okay, let's look at it now by hour, by day, by basket level for affinity analysis, for example. And the second piece of analyze that matters a lot is we don't know what data matters until we start bringing it in and testing. So if we have to go through a rigorous project every time we want to see if data from Pinterest affects our business, we're going to have to a priori make a lot of decisions about what data sets we think matter. But if you can go from immediately loading data to immediately analyzing it, you give that data into the hands of business users who can quickly assess whether or not this data actually matters to your business. And only after you figure out, okay, this data matters, I care about it, I want to expand this to everyone, then you can build a structure to scale that out to everyone. So that's really important. You give the power to people to do ad hoc analysis on the data immediately after it's loaded. Okay, so the next step is to build a hybrid data structure. This is, we've given our business analysts, our ones who we want to give the flexibility, the ability to ask questions very quickly in an Excel-like tool, and we wanted to give them the ability to test what data matters. So now they've figured out what data matters. They figured out some way we want to share this across our business. So now we will build a structure that we will use to scale to everyone else. There's a couple important pieces here. The first is that you should be able to leverage all the work your business analysts just did to scale that out. So with 1010, the language, the actual way that you explore data analytically is the same as you use to transform data and scale it out. So you can actually do ad hoc analysis, figure out how data should be joined together, and we'll show examples, and then scale that across the enterprise using the same interface, same language. In addition, we want to combine data harmonization functionality, things like linguistic algorithms like Metaphone that let you compare strings together to see if they match, and other types of algorithms like that directly in the same tool. And then once you've figured out how they match, immediately set up an automated process. And the crux of all this is the ability to do this on granular data, right? On the line item level granular data, so you're not forced to determine in advance how you want to aggregate it. So let's look at a real example. As a problem that many retailers are solving right now, let's think about combining brick and mortar sales data with e-commerce sales data from two different systems. In order to make the strategic decisions we want to make, these data sets must be combined at the granular level. Right? If we don't combine them at the granular level, we're going to get all the problems we were talking about before, where we have pre-aggregated, we might not be able to anticipate the flexible questions that analysts will have. So let's look at what these data sets look like. We have brick and mortar data with a slightly different structure than e-commerce data. So for example, on one side we have date, other side we have date time, an order date and order time. We need to be able to combine them and create columns that will match across both sides. In this case, split the brick and mortar. We might have a transaction ID that collide with each other. So if we can't just add data on top of each other. If we did, then it would look like we have the same transaction in both. So we need to be able to add prefix and distinguish between transactions that are brick and mortar and online. And lastly, in e-commerce, we don't have a store. So we need to be able to add a zero and distinguish, okay, this is an e-commerce transaction. But we're doing all of this at the line item granular level, so that later on, business users can do the ad hoc flexible analysis that we just talked about on this data from both systems, instead of combining them in a cube that would be store by SKU by day, for example. And lastly, bring together loyalty cards and other things. So what this means is once I've brought these together in a granular way, well, then I can scale across the business in a way that makes sense, in a flexible way where everyone across my business can work with it. So there's a few key components here. And we'll start with the centralized data governance permissioning. So what this means is in our approach, we believe that data governance happening at the data level makes all downstream applications significantly easier to work with. So if you want to share data with a supplier in a limited way, but you don't want them to see cost, for example, on the sales table, you can hide cost from that supplier, and then all applications that you share with them, they won't see cost. You don't need to re-implement data governance across every single application, which is very hard. Next, we have just the variety of ways that you might want to interact with data, whether that's dashboard reports, analytical apps, integrations with other tools, the trillion-row spreadsheet, which is that Excel-like tool where you don't need to do programming to be able to do ad hoc questions, and also obviously integrations, so application developers can build on top. But the key in all of this, in scaling across the business, is because we've done the hybridization, because we've done the data unification at the granular level, we don't need to go back and re-aggregate and do another cube and think about the structure before every single new question. We can just build applications on top. Now, that said, this all works fine and well when you understood the inputs and you were able to bring them together on the granular, in a granular way. But often, as we know, there's something happens and the business changes, and now we need to update this granular structure. So some examples that we've talked about. You can imagine we have new channels. So we now have the ability to purchase via mobile or obviously online before, or maybe buy online, pick up in store. So we have new channels of transactions that we need to include to this granular capability. We might have some new data in the market. So maybe it's online receipts, which we know is interesting for doing rest of market analysis or market share. We might want to bring that in. There's market trends. So we're asking the question, like, how does direct-to-consumer entrance affect our business? So we might want to identify products that are competitive with direct-to-consumer. There are system changes. So you upgrade your POS, things like that. When you do that, you'll need to redo the mapping. But really importantly, when you redo the mapping, all of the downstream systems now work because the mapping is at the granular level. So your downstream system, unlike a point-to-point integration, you don't need to rebuild every single application when you make a change to the one POS system. You build and correct the fix at the hybrid level, and now all of your downstream applications will continue to work. You also might calculate new metrics. We worked with a retailer who was interested in thinking about how to attribute e-commerce sales to a store. So if you're thinking about, okay, maybe consumers are using our store to browse, but sometimes buying online. If they're purchasing from us, from our e-commerce business, we might want to still attribute that transaction to a store, so we can think about where are people buying from. So that's a new type of metric. That's not really sales dollars. It might be e-commerce brick and mortar attributed sales or something. But it's a new metric that has a big impact. So we want to add it at the granular level again. And then obviously there might be new regulations and policies about what you're allowed to keep. So the important piece with updating data structure is the mapping is never right for long, but when it happens on the granular level, when you make these updates, the downstream systems are significantly easier to maintain. And making these updates should be as flexible as possible so that changes can happen very frequently as needed. And we've interacted with customers who are making changes very, very often at the actual model. And then you got to be able to restructure based on analytical needs as well. So let's show an example of the data structure update. So one of the trends that Sylvia talked about was M&A. And if we can imagine, we have our hybrid model that we built a few slides ago. And we made an acquisition. We purchased an international player in our space. So we want to enter a new market. So they'll have, they have their own POS data. There might be some immediate misses. So if they're a DTC player, for example, they might look at things at the UPC level, but we look at its SKU. So we'll need to do some SKU to UPC mapping to be able to continue to do this at the granular level. Next challenge with something like this is they might have sales data denominated in euro or another currency. We have it denominated in dollars. So we want to be able to bring that into the line item detail and have options to summarize both ways. This differs, again, from bringing it together to cube level or aggregate level, which is a lot less flexibility. So again, the overall process that we approach for data unification is to identify and load data, all of it, at the granular level, then make that available for your business users to analyze the data, both to ask very quick strategic questions without needing to go through a whole process, and to test if new data sets matter to the business and if they're interesting, and even to be able to upload their own data into the analysis and add their own data to the analysis themselves as well. And once we've kind of figured out what matters and what we want to work with, then build a hybrid data structure at the most granular level so we don't lose the flexibility downstream, and then scale across the business so that all the users at the enterprise can get access to the data. And importantly, be able to do that while still updating, recognizing we might need to update the data structure over time. So, to summarize, we are seeing this growth of changes, which is causing us to need to answer strategic questions in different ways. And answering those strategic questions often involves bringing together disparate data. So we want to be spending time on insights, interpretation, and action, and as little time as possible on the structuring and technology pieces. So if you can bring that, the way to really achieve that is to have a very fast time to value. Go from loading to analyzing the data very quickly. It's having very, very flexible analysis possible because you're not working on top of cubes. You're working at the granular level. So different types of questions, different types of aggregations are very easy to work with. And then being able to scale that across your whole business so that not just data science people who are writing programs can do this can get the results and insights from this, but you can unlock that to the whole organization. So that's kind of our view of data unification and the power that that it can bring. So we'll end there, but when the rubber hits the road and all these things, it's all about actually seeing it in action. And if anyone's interested, we have these baby-themed cards, as Sylvia talked about, around. And if you want to come up after and either talk to us here or talk to us at the booth, and we have an offer to actually go through and work with any company interested in seeing this in action, bringing different data sets together, and seeing how it works in practice. So thank you all very much. Really appreciate it.